Hi folks, this is a video for parents. I had some good response to the last parent resource video, and so since our story for April is the story of Easter, I wanted to create another resource video for parents with ideas for how to talk about Jesus' death and resurrection with kids. I know that a lot of us might have grown up in churches that really emphasize the doctrine of penal substitution, the interpretation of the events of Jesus' death and resurrection as payment for sin. And that's not always the most helpful model to use when talking about Jesus' death and resurrection. There are times when that really instills a sense of guilt in children and youth that they are responsible for Jesus' death personally. And that's not the way that I choose to parent, and that's not the story that I want to be teaching the children in our church. So I wanted to share with you the outline that I do use for talking about Jesus' death and resurrection with kids at our church. And I hope that this is something that you can use in your own conversations. I think it's an outline that works with kids from about age 3 and up, and you can adjust the language and you can invite more discussion about different points with older kids. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to shoot them my way, and I'd be happy to make additional videos that focus in on one or two of these points. So here is the outline of the story. First, Jesus shows us what God's love looks like in person. This is why we have the incarnation. It's a part of the story that we can start talking about at Christmas. It's also something that's threaded all the way through Jesus' ministry. So almost any of the stories of Jesus' parables or his healing ministry or the ways that he teaches, all of those are stories that we can use to flesh out this idea that Jesus shows us what God's love looks like in person. The second point is that Jesus shows us that sometimes God breaks the rules in order to show how big God's love is. There are lots of examples in the Gospels of this. Times when Jesus ignores the Sabbath laws in order to heal people or feed people. Times when Jesus is eating meals with people who are considered outcasts. The story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector who Jesus calls down out of a tree and then says, "Hi, I'm coming to your house for dinner today." There are lots of stories where Jesus breaks the rules, whether that's religious laws and codes or social conventions, in order to show people that God's love is bigger than those rules. Another way of putting this same idea is that Jesus breaks the rules in order to show us that people are more important to God than the rules are. The third point is that some people got scared because Jesus was breaking so many rules. Now, this is something that can lead to some really interesting discussions because rules do serve a purpose and rules do help us feel safe. And a lot of kids know this. They know that having certain rules and boundaries in the world help them feel safe. And so it can be a really fruitful conversation to think about the reason that some people were scared by Jesus breaking all of these rules. There can be a tendency to villainize certain characters in Bible stories who are in conflict with Jesus. And having conversations about why they were scared by Jesus can help us break down some of that judgmentalism and have empathy and compassion, even for people who were angry at Jesus. It can help us recognize that sometimes we react poorly to Jesus too. It can lead us into some places of humility. The fourth point is that these people who were scared by Jesus breaking the rules really wanted Jesus to stop. And they tried telling him to stop, and that didn't work. They tried telling all of the people who were following him and listening to him to stop following him and stop listening. They tried to convince all of them that Jesus was a bad person. That didn't work. And so they decided that the only way that Jesus would stop breaking all of these rules was if he died. This is the way that I like to frame the story of Good Friday, that Jesus' death is a result of his insistence on loving people in ways that were unexpected and disruptive to the society around him. It was the resistance of people with power to the ideas that Jesus was teaching and the ways that he was living his life. That resistance is what led to his death, as opposed to telling it as it being God's decision that Jesus had to die. There's a little bit of a difference there that has a big theological impact in the way that we tell the story. Depending on the age of the kids that I'm talking to, I might use the language that I used in this video, that the only way Jesus would stop was if he was dead, using that passive language. With older kids, I might move into the more active language of they could only stop Jesus if they killed him. But that's something that you as parents can navigate. You can decide what your kids are ready for, but the more passive language allows us to talk about Jesus' death without the violence of the execution component of it, which can be very troubling to younger kids and isn't necessary for the way that we tell the story. And here's the fifth point. God's love in Jesus was so big that even death couldn't stop it. That was the big surprise for everyone, that even death cannot stop God's love. And so even after Jesus died, Jesus became alive again and continued to show God's love to his disciples and to the world. And because of that, we know that God's love is bigger than anything we might be afraid of. That God's love is the biggest, most powerful force in the world, and we can always trust it. I hope that this video and some of these ideas help you in the conversations that you have with your kids. Like I said, if you have specific questions about any of these ideas, send them my way. I'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one or troubleshoot over email. But I also would love to continue to make videos like this to be a resource to you. So if there are other topics that you find it challenging to talk with your kids about, faith topics, topics about how the Bible connects to our lives, what the Bible is, questions about the seasons of the church year, questions about other religions, heaven or hell or life after death, any of those topics, let me know what topics it would be helpful to you to have a little bit of support in, and I will gladly create more of these videos as a resource to our families. Be well.